All right. Joining us for an interview is Rose from Twitter. Welcome to the show.
Hi.
You and I were talking about this, how when Donald Trump was first elected to the presidency, a lot of celebrities were saying they would, move to Canada or some such place. And the vast majority of them did not follow through on that, but you did.
Well, yeah, I had the opportunity, so I took it. I think that perhaps it was definitely a moment of opportunity more than that I was so impassioned. Certainly, passion caused the move, but because my husband, who I had just married, is German, and he was ready to move back to Germany, it was kind of an easy transition. There wasn't going to be too much work on my end, since he would be able to take care of most of the nuts and bolts of the actual move. So that made a big difference, convenience.
And Germany must be like I've been to Berlin for one night, on my way to Poland, but I haven't really gotten to spend a lot of time in Germany. Like I was only in there one night because of a flight cancellation. It was the purpose of that trip, by the way, was to visit Poland to visit the camps and the ghettos. But we ended up in Germany one night in Berlin because of a canceled flight and having to completely redirect our itinerary. So we ended up staying at, it was actually Christmas Eve in Berlin. The only bit of the city I actually got to experience was we basically visited one of the synagogues there, the historic synagogues in the city. But other than that, I really haven't gotten a chance to experience Germany. From what I've seen, it's a beautiful place. Pretty laid back culture from what I see, and but you've been on the ground for a few years now, so tell me all about it.
5 years, yeah. So I've gotten the privilege of being able to live in a couple places here now. I had visited Germany when I was younger with my family. We just came for like a 2-week trip or something. Um, and so I had an idea of what it was like. And then my husband and I also took like an exploratory trip, Christmas time, also in 2018, going into 2019. And just to make sure that that was definitely what we wanted to do and that it was going to work, and it was what I remembered, and that it was feasible, or that we still had as much interest as we thought we did while we were making plans. So I've gotten to live in Bavaria, like south of Munich, which in the Alps, kind of ideal and what everybody envisions when they think of Germany. And that was for 3 years. And then we decided that we wanted to settle down and find something more permanent and something that would a better living arrangement for our family. So then we moved up to Eastern Germany, actually. And the reason for Eastern Germany is because the real estate is very, very cheap here.
I
So
mean, from what I know about Eastern Germany, I'd imagine it's cheap because a lot of people are moving out there, because my understanding is that because of East Germany's history with communism, it does something like much of Eastern Europe, people are leaving that particular part of the country, and you even see that sometimes in the voting results. Eastern Germany, the AfD routinely sees their best results in that part of the country. So I would say that, like Romania, like Ukraine, like the Baltic states, this part of Germany's political history and history of occupation, I think could explain some of that variance in the real estate prices.
definitely, definitely. A lot moved out as soon as the wall came down. So in 1990, there was a mass exodus. And that was due to a lot of reasons. Of course, the economy of Eastern Germany collapsed when the wall came down completely. So Germany as a country has pumped, I don't know how many billions of dollars into the economy and the infrastructure here, but what we're left with is kind of a rather modernized infrastructure for the area. But yeah, there's not a whole lot of population. So yeah, real estate is quite low. And I think that just like what you see in the American rural area is the same reason that AfD and the other fringe extremist political groups do very well. They have down to the word, populist messaging, the same as you would find anywhere around the world. And it works. It works. Very isolationist, xenophobic, just playing on those fears that rural, in this case, Germans would have. There is a little bit of a different feeling or vibe to it because of the communist history here. So in my particular village, the Linke party does very well. So that is, of course, the communist equivalent of, but it's the same language. It's the same propaganda that you get out of the AFD, just with a little bit different slice of the pie, horseshoe theory and all that.
Yeah. I mean, actually, you see some of that same dynamic in parts of the U.S., particularly like in West Virginia. You had all these voters who in 2016 cast a primary vote for Bernie Sanders, and then in the general election voted for Donald Trump.
Right. Yeah. Right. And you do see that. So the main player out here is Sarah Wagenknecht, who was leading the Linke Party, and then she decided that the Linke Party wasn't facilitating her ends, so she broke off and she's kind of starting her own thing. I would say she's definitely one to watch, because if she can get the AFD or the folks that would be sympathizing with the AFD that maybe aren't so happy with the lack of traction or the lack of any kind of results, that AFD hasn't shown any kind of results in the Bundestag. So if she can pull parts of the AFD and the Linke together, then she may end up with a large enough percentage to actually get funding and power. So
yeah. By the way, I was gonna say, I there's no script right here. We're just talking and seeing where it goes, just so you know. But I was also thinking about the interesting history because of East Germany. There's East Germany, like much of the Eastern Bloc, has been affected by communism. I actually read that there's something that makes East Germany unique is both of its ties to the Eastern Bloc and its ties to Germany itself. In the last 10 years or so, former Eastern Bloc and Soviet countries like Ukraine, Lithuania, the Baltics, Moldova, Hungary, they've all torn, and Poland in particular, they've all torn down their Soviet monuments, particularly in the last few years with Russia invading Ukraine and stuff like that. But the one that hasn't is East Germany, and I think it's because of the role the Red Army played in toppling the Nazis. The people there are kind of afraid to reopen that argument, and so they've I think they've decided that the Red Army was better than the Nazis, as I think. I don't know, but that's what I've read is the reason why the Soviet era statues are still up in Eastern Germany and nowhere else.
Okay, so I'm extremely biased here because I'm an American who lived in West Germany and now living in East Germany, and I grew up during the Cold War era, so I am extremely biased against communism. And I'm trying to have more of an open mind, because I think that if I shut everybody out that has that kind of thinking or that background or that history, that I'm going to miss the parts of it that are human. I think that when we separate into camps, that serves no purpose other than the political machines and the corporations. And what we need to do is try to continue to talk to people that do have different opinions than us. So that being said, my opinion that they haven't taken down the Soviet monuments is more along the lines of the same reason that the rednecks don't want to take down the Confederate statues. It's really, truly just grievance politics. They want to stick their feet in and say, well, we miss the good old days. Remember back when everything was better. We hear this all the time. So we took over a restaurant that's in the middle of a village, and the building itself is almost 400 years old, 370 years old. So there's a lot of history here. It's always been in the middle of the village. So we still get some of the old guys that come and talk to us. And there's a lot of that romanticizing the past and how great it was under communism. They had dance parties every Friday night, and everybody had a place to live, and everybody had a car, and you didn't have to worry about anything, and you didn't have to pay taxes, and you didn't have to worry, blah, 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 blah. So these are all people that were younger. There's just that kind of, again, romanticizing the past. They don't, the ones that do that don't talk about the bad stuff. They don't talk about any of the negative aspects of living under communist Russia. So it's very frustrating for me being a business owner and trying to make it in a really tough business and having to hear this kind of nonsense. Because we see all the downsides.
I mean, you see actually a similar dynamic in places like in Italy, like where they still have statues to Mussolini, they still have things named after him, and in Spain where they still have monuments to Franco. So you still see some of that elements that I guess you see. For context, I'm in Atlanta, and in Atlanta you don't hear a lot of Confederate attitudes, but you might go outside the state, start to go outside the city, and I think there, if you stop in like any given community, you might hear, I don't know if you hear it outright. You're not going to hear people say that slavery was a good thing, but you might hear, romanticization, but it really depends, like, when and where. I personally haven't seen a lot of pro-Confederate rallies, since Charlottesville. I noticed that Charlottesville and George Floyd might have shifted things a little bit, because Mississippi was the last state to have the Confederate battle flag in their flag, and they dropped it a few years ago. So I think some things are beginning to change, and I think there is a growing sense that the Confederacy fought to preserve slavery. That was not a good thing. And I think you're starting to see a little bit more intellectual honesty on that.
I think with this particular issue, because it's a political one, there wasn't anything like the issue of slavery. And yes, of course, Western Germany is associated with Nazism. So they both have skeletons in their closet. One of the good things that I would say, one of the things that I try to really hold on to when people are talking about the old days, is their sense of community. They felt that there was a more cohesive sense of community because everybody owned everything together. Now, of course, coming from the West, coming from America, I don't see it that way. I think that they were all being sold a big fat lie that in fact they owned nothing. And I see that a lot in how derelict the infrastructure got over the course of the DDR. And there's still signs of that. It will take, in my estimation, at least another 30 years before Eastern Germany and Western Germany have enough in common to, I think there will always be a rivalry, at least a good-hearted one, between the two sides, but until there's a point that whether you live on one side of the border or the other side of the border, you can't tell a difference in standard of living.
Right.
But it's tough for me. Again, I was born in 1982, so my entire college education was about the Cold War and Cuban Missile Crisis and all of those stories and that history. And so living in a place where they romanticize, to me, what is the greatest evil of our time. It's so hard. And they'll say things like, look, if it came down to it and we had to, the area that we live in was occupied by the Americans at one point just after the war. And then the Americans gave it up for East Berlin. They traded our little podunk area because what the Russians knew that the Americans didn't is that the hills here had uranium. So the Russians wanted these hills. They were willing to give up half of Berlin for the uranium.
For bombs, basically.
There's definitely some history there. But they've said, I've had people sitting at my table in my restaurant say, if it came down to it, and we either had to be occupied by the Americans or the Russians again, I'd pick the Russians. Like,
What?
oh, like,
I
are you
mean,
paying attention here?
I mean, to be fair, like, unfortunately, there are now Republicans here in the U.S. like saying the same thing. And for context, I grew up in Canada, and unfortunately, they didn't emphasize the Cold War like they do in the U.S. because partly because Canada very much. I think Canada's only participation in a Cold War conflict was Korea. We didn't fight in Vietnam, and Pierre Trudeau, who was Canada's, I believe, longest-serving prime minister. No, one of the longest-serving prime ministers, was personal friends with Fidel Castro. Castro even attended Trudeau's funeral back in 2000. But so I think that has muted the emphasis that anti-communism education has been placed here in Canada. So it's sort of interesting to know that there was a time when they really taught about communism here in the U.S. because certainly I didn't get that up north. But I think I think there's a lot that we can talk about, Germany, and stuff like that. I kind of want to shift focus over to the U.S. like because this past week. I have to say, you probably are feeling vindicated about your decision to move to Germany after just this week alone.
Yeah, starting on July 1st, so 2 days ago, German laws changed so that it's a lot easier for someone like me to have dual citizenship. And I gotta tell you, it's looking pretty attractive. Um, with, I would say, my jury is out until the election is over. I'm very nervous about it, as I think most people are, regardless of what side of the fence they're on. And I was so proud of America during 2020, during the 2020 election, and how they came together and they did the right thing and they voted for the right guy. I don't know if that's going to happen again. I can see a lot of, pieces at play on the board that may chip away at, was it 7 million? That
7
by,
million, but only 45,000 in the states that mattered.
okay. Well, no, but to me, to the way that I think of my homeland, um, I'm part of why I left is because I realized, half of my fellow Americans knowingly, in 2016, I think that there was a lot we didn't know, but in 2020, you knew what a Trump term would mean. You knew what that looked like. You knew there was no more question. There was no more, well, let's see what he can do. Everybody knew exactly what Trump meant by that point. And it, for both elections, 2016 and 2020, about half of America votes for that guy. And we all know why. We all know the mentality and the science behind it and the psychology of Americans and how we are, in love with celebrities and all this other stuff. But after 4 years of him, and there's no more question as to what that all entails. I was very proud that more than half of voting Americans voted for Biden. That made me very, very proud to be American. It made me very proud of my homeland. And yes, I'm not sure it's going to go that way this time. I'm very nervous that it's not. So you're right. But it's not just been this week. It's been as things unfold. I think we knew that Trump was a crook all along. We didn't need him to be convicted of a felony to know that. We know he's a liar. We know he panders to a very extremist crowd. He likes to incite hate in any way that works for him, that he can utilize for his political means. And to see in light of a debate which I doubt that many people even watched, but they've latched onto that as their reason to. I don't know if these people were Democrats to begin with or not. People can say whatever they want on the internet, but it's not looking optimistic right now if you're as much on Twitter as I am.
Right. And for context, we're talking about the debate that I don't know how many people watch, but yeah, Biden had one job in that debate, and it was
Yeah.
prove to the world that he is up to governing and to
Yes,
campaigning.
he was look competent, and he didn't. And I don't think there's any question, at least not in my mind. But in the same token, I haven't felt that Biden was a good speaker at any point in the last 4 to 5 years. Every time the man talks, he's very difficult to listen to. He's extremely old, and that comes through in the way that he speaks. For me, that doesn't matter. He's an administrator, right? So what I care about is he getting things done? Does he put the right people in the right jobs? Is he exercising his power and his position well? Those kinds of things. That's what matters to me. And I have 3 years to say absolutely. But yes, it was not a good performance, and it gave anybody that had any negative thing to say ammunition. Whether that will carry through the summer, I don't know. Americans have a very, very short attention span.
Yep.
But it was disappointing for
Yeah,
sure.
but the big thing I think that somehow eclipsed that debate was the final Supreme Court ruling of the term, which was to give the President of the United States some form of immunity. Here's my honest take on this. I'm not worried about how this will affect Donald Trump. Nothing that he is being accused of is an official act. His prosecutions can proceed intact as far as I am concerned. This is bigger than Donald Trump, and that is what I am concerned. That the fact that the Supreme Court was many people hope would clarify what the limits of presidential immunity and that they would resolve more questions than they raised. They did not do that. They have opened up this huge can of worms. And there's so many unanswered questions about what a president can and cannot do, what they can be held accountable for, and what they can't be. And the worry I have is that not Donald Trump, but future presidents will be able to claim whatever they do is an official act, and they could be presumed to do whatever they want. That is concerning. And I actually think this is maybe a bit of an unpopular opinion in my circle, but I actually like some of the other rulings that the Supreme Court made in curtailing the power of the executive branch. So this ruling, in my opinion, sent the opposite message in that regard.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you from a outside perspective. So I have the safety and security of not living there right now. So it doesn't come as any surprise that they did that. We knew that the court was stacked. So I can't say that I'm surprised, nor have I heard anything registering as even a more than a maybe a byline that this had happened. I think it was all expected, par for the course for this current Supreme Court. And I agree with you. I think that the bigger issue is what this means for the future. But I've never been great at hypothesizing or being able to see things ahead of time. I feel like there's so many variables. So I couldn't begin to guess the implications of this ruling.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would say is if there was ever a time for a constitutional amendment, it might be now. Like one that would do a better job of clarifying, what the limits of presidential immunity are. Because I think, for the sake of separating the office from the person, some level of immunity should be there, but not broad immunity. Because what my friend Patrick Chauvenek on Twitter, I often say it's the Patrick Chauvenek rule. It should be civil immunity for official acts and qualified criminal immunity for official acts and no immunity whatsoever for unofficial acts. In that way, we separate the office from the office holder. But also to do a better job clarifying that the Supreme Court did not do this, but clarify that the president is capable of abusing his power and his duties and should be held accountable for that. And now, apparently, they said that for that you're supposed to have the impeachment process, but we've seen that the impeachment process is paralyzed by partisanship. And I'm kind of thinking about the wisdom of Washington when he said, do not form political parties. And that seems to be bearing out a lot of wisdom right now.
Well, we're so far from that, though. Even the idea of a constitutional amendment to me is, I cannot imagine today's Congress in any way. To be honest, I was shocked that they passed aid for Ukraine. The most recent bill passed. I couldn't believe that went through, and there had to have been things happening behind closed doors that caused that to go through. But like you said, it is a partisan place, and I guess my hope would be that despite this ruling, that the checks and balances that are currently in place, and I'm not talking about impeachment, but just the way that the office works and how the primaries work, that it would become a moot point, that we would elect presidents that behaved in such a way that it never needed to be tested out. That would be my hope.
Yeah, I mean,
maybe too much
as
of
we've
an option.
seen, I was going to say, as we've seen, the founders came up with a really good system, but it is only as good as the people who are elected.
Mm.
And I'm actually kind of wondering if I've been thinking about this for a while. If we had a redo on the Constitution, what would be some changes that we might make? I can start with one. Maybe I would scrap the impeachment process altogether and create much broader grounds for criminal accountability for presidents who abuse their power.
Well, what do you think about this lifelong terms for Supreme Court judges? That seems to be part of the problem here. Well, not part of the problem. You could argue that is the entire problem.
We could have like 18-year terms, so that, and staggered so that each president appoints at least two per term. But in Canada, it's similar to the system of the US, except 70 judges hit 75, they have to retire. So I feel like there are multiple ways that we could reform the Supreme Court. For example, a small reform that I often doesn't get talked about is that I feel like Supreme Court justices, off the order in which the opinions are released is often a political decision, and based on the publicity that they expect each decision to get. I would say there has to be a much more systemic and objective order that these opinions get released in, and in Canada, whenever there's a major landmark ruling, they delay it by a year so that the parliament has time to adapt the laws to the ruling. Whereas in the US, I think when Roe v. Wade was overturned, I think in Missouri within 15 minutes abortion was banned. So like these on like the people like wait for 10 a.m. to see whether there's going to be sudden changes to major policy. I think that would be something I would like to see, rolled back, and like maybe, like I said, term limits on judges, retirement ages, and staying major rulings. I think all of these might take out the anxiety. Like the month of June is honestly, I think, one of the most anxious months, and it shouldn't be for political reasons. I personally think the big problem is that Congress, and to a lesser extent the executive branch, have outsourced their duties to the judiciary. And the big problem is Congress. Congress needs to start passing laws again. And I think some of the rulings were the Supreme Court basically telling Congress that.
I feel like you'd be fighting what it is Americans want. They have the system they have because that's what they want. It's based on entertainment. They don't want to think through things. They don't want time to make sure everything is in place and make sure everything's done correctly. When we make up our mind to do something like move to Germany, you just do it. I think it was 6 months. No, not quite. But about, let's call it 6 months from the time we decided to move to Germany before we did make an international move with children. The Americans, we just, what is it, the phrase shoot ready, fire ready, aim, or something like that? Like
shoot first, ask questions later.
We're more entertained by the chaos that ensues from a poorly thought out plan. Like it's a nation of ADHDers. Like everything, like the nation is as a whole. Right. I don't know that they would want that. I think the entertainment is the point. The drama is the point.
You're right that in order for Congress to start legislating again, we need to start electing fewer Marjorie Taylor Greenes and Matt Gaetzes, and I would also argue Rashida Tlaib's and Ilhan Omar's. We need to start electing, people who maybe in the middle, but particularly people who want to get things done, people who who have ideas and constituents they want to represent, but who are willing to advocate and then bring their ideas to the table and then come up with something that benefits everyone. Lawmakers have forgotten how to do that.
Well, I think one example of what I'm trying to say is when they shut the government down just because they haven't passed the budget. This is an absolutely non-issue. They make it an issue on purpose for the entertainment value. Everyone's going to get their paycheck eventually, and everybody knows that. But oh my gosh, isn't it dramatic when they do? Oh, the government shut down. Oh, well, because so-and-so put such and such in the, like, stop. There was no reason for this. There's no reason. This is all done ahead of time. Everybody knows what's in there. This is not something that is a snap judgment or needs to be dramatic, but they love to do it. It's so good. It's so good for riling up everybody's team blue or team red. And I'm not sure that Americans themselves want a more functional government. And that's part of why I moved, because I don't believe that Americans as a whole actually want to see a government that gets things done. They like the show.
Yeah, I mean, I could come up with ideas all day, like particularly on the budget thing. Canada and many other countries actually have a way to solve the whole government shutdown thing. They have a rule that if a budget cannot be passed, an election is immediately called, and people have a chance to rectify the problem by electing new representatives. I feel like, I don't know if it would take a constitutional amendment, but like, what if in like an odd number year, if the government shuts down at the end of September, then a snap election is called that November?
Again, I don't think so. Part of that isn't necessarily what Americans want, but I think that has to do with money. Having these 4-year cycles means a lot of money gets funneled through the political process. Millions, billions, and billions and billions of dollars are being spent because they have an entire year to campaign, at least, usually more than that. That's a year's worth of ads. That's a year's worth of what is that, Act Blue and texts and the people that are sending them. This is a huge money-making corporation or machine. And I think that you would be fighting forces bigger than we know to try to shut that down, because that is such a major source of the major component of the American economy is this year-long election cycle. So if you had a snap election, imagine just 6 weeks of campaigning and how that would change everything. I think that we saw that on our side of Twitter when there's the 2 years in between, the 2 years that the election has been decided, and all of these kids that are out there making maps and doing polls, and their entire life is wound up in this the campaign and the election. And then for 2 years, we know there's definitely nothing's going to happen. Nobody knows who's going to be running. There's no point in doing anything. And they basically go into depression. I don't think basically, I think some of them actually do, because they have 2 years. But it's just 2 years. And after that 2 years, we start over because everybody knows in the third year, we're going to start. And in the fourth year, now it's go time. So that, and it's not just the entertainment value, but there's a lot of money being spent. So I don't know if this is something that's fightable or winnable, even if it's a bad system.
You're extracting more reforms out of me as you talk, by the way, Rose. Like, how about having the campaign start in year 4, the debates maybe by May, you have one national primary, like both parties have their national primaries at the beginning of August. The convention is a week or two later, and then we move into the general election by Labor Day, and there you go. You have a year-long campaign.
I'm not, well, when do the early voting ballots go out, though? Would that be a sticking point? What
I
kinds
think
of
in 2020, you mean general election or primary?
general election?
So I think by like Labor Day, I think the first states to send out the early ballots, I believe, were Iowa and North Carolina. So that would be like shortly after Labor Day. I mean,
Okay.
it would mean we have to fundamentally reform how quickly these votes get counted, when they get counted, and how quickly these things get done.
I feel like the polls are actually one of the better functioning parts of the American electoral process. I certainly there are issues here, there, especially there maybe in rural areas they might take longer, but as a whole, I think it's actually one of the better working parts of our government. So I'm not sure that would be a problem.
Do you think the polls are right?
I think they're imprecise.
Because I believe the polls in 2022. I thought Republicans were going to gain like 25 seats. They gained 9.
Mm-hmm. I think that most of them are done in good faith, but they have failed to figure out how to actually capture an accurate representation of the electorate. So
Yeah, I mean, if we believe the polls, Biden's going to lose. I've always for the late while I've kind of been a fundamentals type of guy, like looking at trends, like from actual election results, and trying to see, right now everyone seems to think Georgia's going to go for Trump. I am honestly not so sure because the trends in Georgia have been brutal for Republicans, and in fact, although on the state level, Republicans did very well, on the federal level, they did horribly. Raphael Warnock won by almost 3 points in what was supposed to be a red wave year.
I would say that I also try to look at trends rather than single data points when it comes to the polls. But when I said that the polls functioned well, I was talking about the actual like voting boxes, right? Not the pollsters. um, but I think I agree. I try to look at where things are headed. One thing I find fascinating is that betting website where people bet on who's going to win. I find that fascinating. I'm not sure how much stock I would put in it, but I think I would at least put as much stock into that as I do any single poll coming out of any of the different organizations.
Okay, I mean, yeah, in special elections, on the whole, have been. I mean, there was this Ohio seat in what is supposed to be one of Trump's strongest areas. In Appalachia, he won the seat by 29 points. The Republican won by 9. That's a 20-point swing against them. I think with each individual election, like special election, you can dismiss it to various local factors. Like this is an area, for example, that's an area of Ohio that used to be very Democratic about 20 or so years ago. But I think in aggregate, it's the special election results are not pointing to an advantageous environment for the Republicans.
I personally feel that's a lot about optics. With Trump, you have a celebrity, a true celebrity, American millionaire. I mean, that's the perception, right?
Yeah.
The guy from that did a cameo on Home Alone. That's who Donald Trump is, and in the American mind, that will never change. And we tend to deify wealth in America. Yeah, can someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene have the same optics as Trump? No, of course not. So will she do as well as Trump in the polls? Maybe in her area, but she doesn't have the celebrity status that he has. And I think that they all chase that because they know they need to. But I think that comes down to more optics. And I think that on the local level and for like congressional seats, you just don't have that glimmer and shine that you do for the presidential election. So I think that's what you're missing there, and probably why there isn't as much positive traction for Republicans on the more local levels. But that's my philosophizing about Americans.
Right. I mean, there is certainly a lot to think about. I honestly do not know how this election is going to go. Do you think this is the most important election of our lifetime, as they always say, or is this one being overblown a little bit?
No, if anything, I think it's being underestimated. I think people have gotten rather complacent having a competent president, and yeah, I think that this is at least as important as 2020, and definitely possibly more. So I think that it just slipped back into this thinking of like, you want a hot shot in the Oval Office, and you don't want a hot shot there. You want an administrator. You don't need a celebrity in that office. You need somebody who signs papers and does the administrative work, not someone that knows how to blow up the media with a crazy tweet every day. That's not helpful for getting things done. Your ideas for reforms, I think, are all solid ones.
I have
But
one
you're
more, by the way. I have one more I want to share with you. It would be that maybe certain cabinet officials should be elected either by popular vote or the same way as the president, namely the attorney general. Maybe we would elect them, alongside the president, like most states do. Maybe that would bring some independence to a part of the government that maybe should be a bit more independent. Because on paper, the attorney general, like any other cabinet official, answers to the president. But maybe that shouldn't be the case anymore.
That's a hard one for me in the context of the American government because it is so partisan. So I feel like there would be just stonewalling for the sake of stonewalling, and then you're talking about the justice and law, and I'm not sure. I can see it going either way. That kind of the way that you expect Congress to flip Republican or Democrat each presidential cycle, and it's not conducive to getting things done. So there's this idea that they're gonna. I've done it myself. Voted for the other guy on the other camp just to kind of thinking that I was going to balance things out, when in reality, then they just don't work together. So I'm not sure. I can see what you're saying, but I'm not sure that works in today's environment where
Yeah, I mean,
every position becomes partisan.
it's these are all like some of these are unconventional ideas, but I've thought about this for a while now. I honestly believe the founders gave us Article 5 for a reason. People say that the Constitution is perfect. No, it's not. That's why there's an amendments process.
But in today's American political climate, the idea of amending the Constitution is blasphemy. And I think this feels like such ancient history that we can't even remember the process by which we get there.
Yeah, I mean it's happened 27 times and hopefully counting.
But I think maybe my skepticism is showing. You're talking to someone that did cut ties, that did cut and run. Not because I felt that America couldn't be fixed, but I'm not sure America can be fixed in my lifetime, and certainly not within my children's childhood. That's what I was looking at. I was looking at my kids get 10, 15 years of childhood, right? Is America going to be even rational within those 10, 15 years? And I couldn't see that happening. And I wanted my kids to have a childhood. So that was really my strongest motivating factor. So things like amendments or reforms, yeah, the great idea, but I can't see the current generations doing it.
I hope you're
I've
wrong.
not seen anything from the Gen X, Millennial, Gen Z generations to give me any sort of optimism about them making a more functional U.S. government.
I mean, you're right that the entertainment. I think the what might if U.S. has an undoing, what it might be is partisanship and our love of entertainment. I often joke that the Americans love their celebrities more than the British love the royals at this point.
I don't disagree at all with that.
Yeah, I mean, but at the same time, I see a growing interest, among, ordinary people, not politicians who benefit from the current system, but like ordinary people seem to be taking more and more of an interest in fixing what might be broken. And you know, one person might not be able to make much of a difference, but in aggregate, if we become more numerous and we raise our voices, eventually people will have to start listening to us and take our ideas seriously. Already we see states experimenting with different ways of electing people instead of just person with the most votes wins, which again rewards this type of showmanship and extremism. We're seeing other systems that reward people who tack to the middle and who tack towards solving problems. And the most recent set of primaries actually give me some hope because, except for that Lauren Boebert out in Colorado, all of the other showmen got rejected. You also had Jamal Bowman, who was also like more of a showman on the left. He also got thrown out by his own party. So if that continues, and we see more of that maybe in the next set of primaries 2 years from now, maybe we can see more and more fixing of what's broken.
I I applaud your optimism. I'm very concerned about misinformation. I'm very concerned about AI and furthering that misinformation and the kind of climate that makes, and how that damages our ability to get things done, to understand how government works. I feel like you're talking from a kind of insulated area where you're around a lot of people that are probably intelligent, probably plugged in, paying more attention than the average person. Um, you've got to get enough traction within that to actually make those changes. And although there have been some encouraging signs, perhaps, in recent elections, just like the polls, I want to see a trend. I don't want to see one positive thing or that, okay, Biden got in, was elected 2020. Elect him again. Let's do it again. Let's keep him in. Let's get some more things done. Let's give him 4 more years to actually make some lasting changes. And I'm just right now, I'm not sure that any good intentions can fight the wave that's coming. But again, I'm living in a place not dissimilar. So I moved here from Arizona, from rural Arizona, and it's very, very similar thinking. Very, very similar propaganda gets tossed around and gets fed to the populace here. And I don't know how to fight that. I haven't figured that out. And I'm not sure anyone does yet, or if they do, they haven't made enough progress in fighting it, because with the way that information is shared in amongst the younger generations, uh, I don't know. I need more time. I need more positive signs than just a few good elections. Um, I'm very worried about this current election in November.
All right. I
So
mean,
wrong,
before
but
we, I guess before we end off, I will say that after what happened in 2022, I've been paying less attention to the polls. What I'm listening to is Alan Lichtman, the professor who he's called 9 of the last 10 presidential elections correctly. He thinks Biden's in the driver's seat.
I hope he's right.
Well,
Again, America loves its entertainment, so it's going to come down to what the most entertaining thing is to do at the time, and when they get to the ballot box.
Rose, thank you so much for talking with me today. Let me give you a chance to plug where people can follow you and hear what you got to say.
If you want to hear more of what I got to say, Twitter's the best place. So I think, what am I, Sassy Rose on Twitter? X, as it's called now. But you can find me anywhere. I'm on all the different platforms doing various stuff. I paint. So my Instagram is for painting, and then I've got stuff for my restaurant. So if you're ever in Eastern Germany, do look me up. I'm in a little town called Tannenbergstal, or Moldenhammer. It's right on the border with the Czech Republic. So that's
All right, if you want to find her on Twitter, on Instagram, or in real life for some reason, then you know where to find her now.